Okay, we will start the meeting. Everyone, microphones on. This is the June 18, 2025 meeting of the Freeport Project Review Board. I want to acknowledge a couple folks before we ask for an information exchange from Kyle, the town planner. Chalmers, this is your last official meeting with us for the Freeport Insider, and we want to thank you for all the meetings you go to every month, which is more than anyone in town hall probably.
Yeah. That's probably true. Glad to see there's a complete board.
The complete board was here. We had a quorum at 5:45, and we were all here at 5 of 6.
We knew you were coming, Chalmers.
Yeah. I also want to acknowledge Todd Yankee, who left the board to work full-time on Coastal Waters Commission as of last month, and welcome Dan Lynch, who's our newest member of the Project Review Board. And Dan had a great deal of responsibility at the Brunswick Naval Air Station and is well equipped to help us here. So welcome.
Thanks.
Kyle, you want to give us a information exchange?
Sure. So update on the comprehensive plan update. The comp plan will be going back to the planning board for discussion on July 2nd. So if you'll recall, for the last month or two, it's been at the state level for the state review, so they can find the comp plan language, whether it was consistent or not with the Growth Management Act. We got that finding of consistency back from the state, which is a great next step. So next steps will be that it'll be going back to the planning board to review the kind of recommended state comments that came through with their feedback, any public comments that have come in the past month or so, as well as kind of last comments for the planning board themselves. And then after that July 2nd meeting, we'll start to look at scheduling the public hearing for the comprehensive plan update and moving forward. So that's moving along. All good news there. Update on design review ordinance update. So we're going to take a text version only, so no graphics or illustrations yet, but just like the text language of the process and the standards of the draft design review ordinance update to the planning board on July 23rd. So the planning board's going to have a second meeting, most likely in July, where they talk about that. So PRB members, as design review obviously applies to you all, are welcome to attend and kind of, sit in the audience and be able to offer in any feedback during that planning board discussion. But we'll follow up with a reminder on that. The goal would then be so we have that kind of text version being discussed just for preliminary feedback on some of the standards and the layout of it. And then we would take that, Caroline and I would present that at the July 23rd meeting, and then we would send that off to North Star, the consultant. They would take it and finish up and finalize to bring a kind of complete draft with the graphics and everything back to the planning board, maybe in early September. Topics reviewed by the planning review board, or the planning board, sorry. So a couple relevant things. Last month, the planning board, or earlier this month, the planning board talked about the potential revisions to section 602, site plan review. So I had mentioned this to this board previously, that we were going to start looking at ways to possibly clean up and improve some of the processes that are a little informal in the site plan ordinance. So the planning board really just kind of got an overview and background of the existing site plan process and some of the hiccups that we noticed along the way. So when we have some draft language that's ready to go back to the planning board there for some cleanup, we'll let the PRB know as well, since you all use that ordinance as well and would be able to offer in some valuable feedback there. The goal isn't really to change much in the way of standards with this, but it's to see if there are kind of efficiency steps along the way where we could potentially, there are a lot of kind of vague and like loose end steps in the way that the site plan ordinance is currently worded, where it relies a lot on kind of practice and the feeling of the planner or the board at the time. And it would be better to formalize some of those processes. The other change that the planning board looked at was in regards to the campground ordinance. So it's something that, again, this board has talked about. So the planning board did recommend that we go to make it clear that we use a net calculation when looking at campground density. So that was the model or the language that we crafted in the draft. That will be going to council on the 24th to set the public hearing. So if anyone's interested in that, they can attend as well. And then coming up at the July 2nd planning board meeting, we're going to be looking at language to revise or amend the building height in the Village Commercial 1 district on Depot Street, which is a recommendation of the downtown vision plan. And it's sort of meant to capture that leading into our new comp plan update. And then lastly, staff approvals. We have not had any staff approvals lately, so no updates there.
Thank you, Kyle. Next is review and approval of the meeting minutes from our May 21 meeting. Everyone's received them. Are there any proposed changes or deletions? There being none, is there a motion to accept them as presented?
Motion to accept as
Is there a
presented?
second? All in favor of accepting the minutes? Thank you, Sharon. There are two items on the agenda tonight, both potentially for final approval, subject to review by the board, and there are no formal public hearings on either of these matters. The first is Bush Cricket Properties at 298 Route 1.
Yeah, so just a quick overview. So we talked about this last month at the conceptual stage. The applicant came back with their full submission. Yeah, you can plug in up there if you want. The overall layout maintained the same as what was presented last month at the conceptual meeting. You'll notice on the plans things that were included this time that we didn't see last month. The stormwater plans were more fleshed out. You'll notice the grading going back to that back portion of the lot. And then if you're looking at the plan on the screen, that top left corner is where everything sort of leads to. And then eventually to the right of way by the interstate. I'll let the applicant expand more on that, though. But we also saw some updated landscape plans, which show plantings in the front setback and starting down both of the side setbacks. So I think I called out in the memo that really satisfies the requirements laid out in the ordinance. The front setback is really where our existing landscaping standards in this area call out for plantings. The sides are, whereas those areas are really partially impervious now, there wasn't much removal of existing vegetation in those areas. The fact that it's grassed isn't really a concern in terms of current ordinance language. But if for some reason, there was a perceived issue by the board with an abutting property there, there is room to look at increased plantings in those side setbacks as well. One thing we called out in the memo, the lighting plan, the photometric plan, largely everything good there. There is one standard that our ordinance has. So for parking lots, the average foot candle limit in our ordinance is 1.5 foot candles. So that's taking the average of kind of the whole parking lot area and saying, you can't go above 1.5. In the chart on the photometric plan, I don't know if you have an update on this, Eric, but the last one that we had seen showed 1.89. So that's something we called out as a condition of approval that would just have to be revised prior to any building permit being issued, but it's not really a concern that would go beyond the level of something that could be resolved, a condition of approval, and just reviewed by staff later on. Other than that, we did receive, so in your packets, you would have seen the comments by our peer review engineer. The applicant submitted a response to those comments, which you also would have seen in your packet. We did get an update after we sent the packets out from our peer review engineer, which was not sent to you in advance, so I had that on the dais in front of you before the meeting. So for the most part, all of the comments identified in the original memo were taken care of. If you'll see the updated memo, there were really 3 things still left on there. One of them under, utilities, the third point there is really nothing substantial at all. It's just kind of verifying the fact that the applicant is still waiting for the sewer and water capacity letters, which we've made a condition of approval. That's a typical condition that the board makes. Utility point 4 there is adding a note to the detail in the plan set. And then point 2, the applicant might have some feedback on, but was just a recommendation from our peer review engineer that because of the, while the post-development flow rate of stormwater was going to be less than the pre-development flow, our peer review engineer called out that the concentration of that stormwater to that DOT right-of-way at the back property line could be higher, that just notification to DOT of that is recommended. But that's really the only remaining comment. We would just add a condition of approval that those 2 comments really be followed up on, and there would be no remaining staff concerns here with this project. Happy to answer any other questions that the board has along the way, but I turn it over to Eric and the applicant team.
Eric, may I ask one question before you start?
Absolutely.
Kyle, I assume that the applicant will have some comments on the stormwater condition you raised. It doesn't show up as a proposed condition in our motion.
Yeah, I had worded in the staff memo and in the proposed findings of fact, like if, for instance, if you go to the proposed finding of fact for surface water drainage, I put in the end there, confirmation from the town's peer review engineer that the comments have been addressed to satisfaction is forthcoming. A proposed condition of approval has been included that the town's peer review engineer provide their follow-up comments and the applicant address any remaining concerns. So I put it in that section, but I forgot to add the condition of approval to the actual proposed motion. So if we do get to the point that there's a proposed motion, we just ask that someone on the board add that condition in.
That's the first mistake you've made since you came to Freeport.
I'm sorry.
But I have a question. So, and I'm sorry to I hope I'm not putting the cart before the horse here, but just so I understand how we're handling this. We may end up asking the applicant to notify DOT, but there's no requirement of them to approve it and get back to us?
Yeah, the way I read that is the recommendation from peer review engineers that they reach out to DOT to make them aware. I don't think there's any concern on our side that what they're proposing doesn't meet our stormwater standard. It was more for notification purposes. I think if the response from DOT was that there was some issue, then we might have to address that, but that it wasn't necessarily a concern for approval.
Okay, thanks.
That we wait for the response.
I can expand on that a little bit more, Ford, when I get to that. Eric Doobie, Petroleum Engineering, here with Kyle Berwick, Petroleum Engineering. Becky Lizotte from Doughton Construction. And thanks for having us, appreciate it. Just put in a comment, on the front end. Kyle's been great to work with. We deal with a lot of different towns, and it seems like towns have changed their, maybe their process, their format a little bit. I'm glad to see that this process still kind of remains the way it should be, which is really working directly with the planner instead of just kind of going through just a checklist item without any, back and forth and conversation about some of this stuff. So Kyle, thank you very much for your assistance during this process. It's like a breath of fresh air for us. So,
Thank you.
especially dealing with different municipalities, depending on where they are.
I'm sure Chalmers got that part, so.
I hope so. So, yeah, I guess I'll just hit the highlights on this. Probably the biggest thing, we had already had the stormwater done. I think I'd said that before, because it's a tight site, so we needed to make sure that we had that nailed down before we came in front of you kind of the first time around. The landscaping piece, we work with Tony Coles, landscape architect, typically. He's been great to work with over the years. I've had a lot of success with him, and so Tony was able to kind of help us through that process on this. He's worked for other projects that around here and in other places. So we've kind of nailed that down. Any comments, we can certainly take a look at that specifically. With regards, I'll start with that drainage then, Ford. So basically what it is, DOT is like every other neighbor, right? What our intent is, or what our, essentially our goal is for any of these projects we work on, we want to make the post drainage less than the pre. And that's the reality. That's what's required by Chapter 500 with DEP. It's required by basically all municipalities on that. So in this case here, we're doing exactly that. The flow may be a little bit different, but in the end, we have a lot of area between us and the right-of-way and what's going on, and then we have some cattails and, we'll call them some wetlands that are essentially developed by them making 295. So I don't see a specific issue with that, especially with the flow being less. Maybe it's concentrated, but the reality is with our retention system that we have to have and our treatment system under the parking lot, what happens is you have these structures that it goes through, and then the structure is the orifice out of that structure, which is usually like an 8, 6, or a 4-inch orifice, which is really a pipe. That dictates the amount of flow. You can only get so much flow through that pipe, so that's why you end up getting a lot less flow with the storage in behind it than what you had previously. So just to kind of go through a quick, not get into too much detail, but that's essentially what we're doing here. We still have really the same amount of flow or a little less than that overall going to that same big ditch that we've all seen adjacent to 295. So hopefully that helps. It's not that we need their approval, and DOT is tough to get something back, but we wouldn't get an approval from a neighbor if we were less for them also. So I think the way we're handling it with the peer review and satisfying that and basically telling them that, I think is the appropriate way to.
So it's okay for you to notify them?
It is. I doubt we'll get anything back, but maybe we will. If we do, if they come back and say, what is it, then I'm going to explain it very similar to what I just did. So the exact same explanation. If we need to send them drainage reports, we'll send them drainage reports and deal with that. So I don't think I had any other comments with regards to any of the other requirements on that, just really maybe some small cleanup items.
Eric, so one thing that I forgot to bring up that's not unique to just this site, but kind of corridor as a whole, is the parking requirement. So in the commercial districts, the project review board is the one determining the parking requirement based on what the applicant is proposing. It's a little different than other districts where we have a minimum parking requirement that says you need X number of spaces per X square footage of building area. So the applicants propose 26 parking spaces here. They talk in the application about it's based on the number of employees, some of which are typically in the field when they expect, the same amount of customers coming in person as that there's typically been, which is, I think it was like a couple possibly each day, as it's typically a business where most of the customers are not coming in person. But so if the board has comments there on that, that is something that the the board has the authority to look at. We don't have a specific minimum parking requirement. It's something you're really basing off of what the applicant's proposing.
Yeah, so basically, based on our last meeting, we had talked about specific parking and exactly what you just said, Kyle, on that. So we went back and double-checked with the owner and talked about what that expansion would be, or possible expansion would be for what they are now. And so the numbers that were in front of you, where the follow-up information is really what we came up with on that. So, so that's how we arrived at that. I mean, Mr. Sachs made a comment about, any future people, if that building got sold, I mean, they're going to have to deal with that, like any other business would. If it's a change of use, they have to deal with it through planning. If it's not, then they have to deal with it through basically these parking standards of what's there and how they're going to deal with that. So kind of in the purchase and sale type situations. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of communities right now that are changing their parking requirements based on the fact of, maybe not as much need-based, but going to, or when I say need-based, I mean not something that we're putting some formula out to them, but it's actually more need-based or based on the, like the MDOT or ITE traffic kind of information on that. So we're dealing with that not just here, but in other communities where you're kind of going back and forth about what your needs are, and then having that discussion with planning. So.
I have a question. Getting back to the pre and post flow of the stormwater, I understand that they're asking to inform DOT about the amount, about the change now. I'm wondering if we can include something that says, like, within at 1 year post construction, and, when everything is working, that there can be at least a review to make sure what they originally calculated is what you end up having there. I don't know if DOT would expect to get that, but I just think sometimes you want to make sure your calculations, which are always amazing with all the computers and all, but in real life, it's something that actually works the way you think.
So we do get, so you'll notice the one condition that's usually a kind of a typical condition of what we do requires that the applicant enter into a maintenance agreement for stormwater. So they will have kind of an annual inspection report that they send to us that shows that the stormwater feature that they've installed is operating as it was supposed to install. So we have a couple of checks there. One, during the construction process, our engineer will go out to site to make sure everything is being built as it was approved. And then, the final inspection is given, and, that's when the town engineer, or peer review engineer, will sign off and say, yep, everything's great, it was built as the PRB approved it. And that's when the performance guarantee gets released back to the applicant. But then from there, that annual maintenance agreement kicks in, where they have to send to us every year, some evidence that those features are operating as they should be. So they wouldn't be sending it directly to DOT necessarily, but we get that to make sure that things aren't clogged and it's creating any issues on site. And if it did come back, typically the property owners will say, oh yeah, there was an issue with whatever stormwater feature, but we cleaned it up and now it's fine. So just to kind of shed some light on that.
This is standard in all.
Yeah, so you'll see, most of the projects we approve, we include that stormwater maintenance agreement provision for anything where they're installing something like this to manage drainage. So anything where they're adding a substantial amount of impervious area. So it's something we actually just went through collecting those kind of annual stormwater reports in May. So yeah, every year we get a handful of emails coming in from different projects that the board has approved over the years, kind of updating on those stormwater features.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Another process question, I think this is more for you, Kyle, but assuming the board is okay with the parking as submitted, does your motion imply that we're okay with that? We don't need to call it out as a condition?
I don't think the way the ordinance is worded, you have to specifically approve it, I think, if you're approving the plan and the application as proposed.
That's great.
I think that's.
Just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
I guess the one other last thing I'd call out in the memo, those section 527 standards, which apply to all of our commercial districts. They have some building design standards, which we talked about a lot at the last meeting. We talked about the design of the building and how that kind of fit in with those standards and met everything there. It also has some signage standards and some access and landscaping things, which are all covered in the application. I think one building sign is proposed out back, it looked like maybe, and then there's the existing sign out front, so
Yes.
there were no concerns there. The only other thing really that comes up is there's a standard in that section that talks about this 5-foot pedestrian walkway. And honestly, the more I look at the standard and read it, the more I want it to disappear and be reworked, because honestly, I think it's pretty problematic, and I feel like the board has probably felt that way over the years as well, considering when I look back at past approvals of the board, there have been multiple instances of projects along this corridor where the board hasn't required that pedestrian walkway to go in for a variety of reasons, whether it's there's nothing existing for it to connect into, or the topography of the site, or what have you. So I know one thing I talked a little bit with the applicant about is to not necessarily have a pathway on the property built out, but that they work with the town at such future time that the town might be interested in installing sidewalk there, and work with the town for an easement along their right-of-way to connect into, if you remember looking at the plan last month, there's that small stretch of existing sidewalk to the property to the north. It wouldn't make much sense to have a stretch of sidewalk in the right-of-way and then have that go onto a private lot to connect into some 5-foot pathway. It would make more sense if the town was ever at a point where we were looking to kind of extend the sidewalk along that stretch of corridor, that we just connect all of that in together.
And if you've seen the proposed motion, that's condition 5, is
I
that?
did add that
agreeable to you?
condition in there.
Yeah, that's correct. It looked like a mode pathway, essentially, to make sure that people could still walk in that, I guess, the area between the right-of-way and the actual edge of pavement, which is like 12, 15 feet wide, because that was one of the conversations I had with Kyle after their last month's meeting, is that we have existing sidewalk, to the north of us, that's essentially along the corridor, but then we were going to move it up within our right-of-way 5 feet. So it just seemed like it seemed like most people would continue just walking along Route 1 and not go up and use it, and which is fine, but I was like, where do you really want us to put this thing? Do we want some space in between or whatever? And then Kyle ended up coming back and saying, you know what, let's just for now, I think the best idea would have a mode path so that people could get out of the travel way, up onto the grass and be able to utilize that. And I said, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to turn this into a bigger picture policy discussion, but I do think it's something that the board, we should potentially talk about at some point, and then potentially recommend something over to the planning board, because it's already on the town's work plan, the planning board and council's work plan, to look at some changes in the C3, C1 area based on the comprehensive plan. And I think this whole idea of pedestrian access in that corridor and reworking some of these standards in 527 could be part of that, because it just doesn't make a ton of sense in my mind, because we don't introduce any sort of standard outside of just saying you need to do a 5-foot wide path of some material that's very non-specific. It doesn't talk about the grade of the path. It doesn't talk about a maintenance requirement. It doesn't talk about requiring a public access easement along it. So
Some year we'll
little
come
concerned.
around to a lot of different addresses on Route 1 South to try to see what we've pieced together, because we've approved multiple projects over the years where we have this kind of loose arrangement that we'd like to do something sometime. So thanks for working with us on that.
Yeah, no, we're happy to do whatever, whatever your guidance is on that. The reality is when DOT, if they ever do it and they get it down below, it's hard to walk on 45-mile-an-hour roads anyway. It really is in Maine. So, but if DOT comes around to redoing that, then, I mean, they should really just institute that and then be able to put that in at that point where it's all uniform and then happens along the whole corridor. That's my opinion.
Great. Any other questions for the applicant? This is not a formal public hearing, but is there anyone from the public who would like to be heard? Is there a proposed motion? I'll say, just as by way of comment, the few concerns I had got addressed in the peer review. So, is there a motion that anyone cares to make?
Sure. I will do it. Be it ordered that the Freeport Project Review Board approve the printed findings of fact and site plan review for a new 3,500 square foot building and associated parking area by Bush Cricket Properties LLC at 298 US Route 1, tax map 26, lot 51A, to be built substantially as proposed with the application dated April 30th, 2025, and revised materials received through June 11, 2025. Finding that it meets the standards of the Freeport zoning ordinance with the following conditions of approval. 1, this approval incorporates by reference all supporting plans that amend the previously approved plan submitted by the applicant and their representatives at Project Review Board meetings and hearings on the subject application to the extent that they are not in conflict with other stated conditions. 2, prior to construction, the applicant obtain any applicable permits from the Freeport Codes Enforcement Department. 3, prior to construction, the applicant obtain an entrance permit and highway opening permit from the Public Works Department. 4, prior to the issuance of any building permits, the applicant does the following. A, establish an inspection account in an amount to be determined for the inspection of site improvements by the town. B, establish a performance guarantee in the amount to cover the cost of all site work associated with a project in an amount to be determined in a form acceptable to the town attorney. The performance guarantee shall cover the cost of all site work, along with a performance guarantee, a non-refundable administrative fee at the rate established by the Freeport Town Council be paid. C, the developer have a pre-construction meeting with the town planner. D, enter into a maintenance agreement for a stormwater management system with the town of Freeport to be recorded in the Cumberland County Registry of Deeds with yearly stormwater reporting to the town of Freeport being required. E, provide the planning department with letters from Freeport Sewer District and Maine Water that adequate sewer and water capacity is available. F, provide a revised photometric plan that meets the standards of section 521.a of the zoning ordinance for parking lot foot candle limits.
G?
Can you add in this G, Fred?
G,
Address the remaining.
address the remaining comments made by the town's peer review engineer in the memo dated June 12th, 2025. That was G, okay. 5, the applicant will work with the town of Freeport to provide an easement along the right-of-way at such time in the future that the town may wish to install sidewalks along this portion of Route 1. And 6, the approval of a site plan shall become void if construction of site improvements is not initiated within 2 years of the date of such approval, unless such time limit is extended by the board that granted the original approval.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of the motion as presented? Unanimous, Sharon. Thanks for doing your project in Freeport.
Thank you very much.
It looks good, too. Thank you.
Second item is design review certificate for Scott Gleason at 23 Depot Street.
So I'm gonna.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can give a brief overview, but let me just pull up the slides here for context. So yeah, this is solely a design review certificate.
Yeah,
application. Do you want me to go to the last slide there?
First slide.
First slide.
Yeah, wait, no, right.
There we go. I'll let Scott go into most of it since it's a pretty small application. The one thing I'll comment on is the first 2 points here. Because the applicant is proposing to replace the existing siding with cedar shake siding and the architectural shingle roof, those parts of this don't actually trigger design review. They fall under existing exemptions under the design review ordinance. So the parts of this that the board is really looking at are the 5 proposed skylights on the building portion of the roof of the building portion, and the 3 new windows proposed on the tower portion. And then I think in there, somewhere in the application, it was mentioned about, potentially a future change of use that would get addressed on the site plan side, whether it triggered staff approval or board approval later down the line. So as of now, we're just looking at the design review component for the windows.
Perfect, awesome. So thanks for hearing this plan out. So I acquired the hose tower. It used to be the Amtrak. I think most people are familiar with it. And as a condition was to pretty much let the town run the train station until they kind of figured out whether they were going to continue with the train station. So last year, the train station did shut down. So the town no longer runs that, which gave me free ideas of what to do with the building. So it's been a process, but that happened in June. I had a tough time getting anybody that really wanted to go do any cedar shading project up a 5-story pyramid-shaped tower. But I finally was able to get that going this spring. So we also, aside of the windows, the reason we're even talking about this is that right now is the time, if I did want to get skylights and you're stripping off a roof, you do the skylights now. And if we do want to expand onto the second floor, I was advised by Kyle and codes that in the tower, I'm just setting up the reason, in the actual tower on that second floor is actually a large room that we found during some of the renovations, and it's actually an 11 by 11. It's a huge room with a really, really tall ceiling. So if it was going to be, we have this idea of whether it be office space or whatever, to connect it with some sort of a spiral staircase. But the minute you start putting people in there, then we have a requirement for an egress. So the window has to go in. So what we've done is, so that's where the windows are added. So how many windows do you do to make it look symmetrical? That part, actually, I'm open to. We thought 3, that would look nice. You want 2? Well, I have to have 1. Right, Kyle? I think I have to have 1 window as a requirement.
I believe so,
Yeah.
but I'm also not the code officer,
Yeah,
so
I was
don't wanna say
told
for
a
sure.
minimum of 1. So essentially, let's go with the skylights first. So on the outside siding, we had a bunch of choices to go. We could go with synthetic siding. We just decided that, first of all, I own the building. Ella Bean actually owns the land. So I actually just own the actual structure. So we went through all of these ideas. We could do synthetic siding, and they all really didn't look terribly good when we laid them up there. So we decided to just go with cedar. I've been guaranteed that it would be a minimum of 35 years. I'm 55. That's going to put me to 90. I'm probably okay with going with the cedar shakes. So we're going to end up going with the cedar shakes and then the new architectural window. So the reason for the skylights is now that we've stripped out the second floor, it's very open. It's a very open cathedral ceiling. It sort of just begs for a little something more. So the skylights that we're proposing are very narrow. These are not the big, wide, obnoxious ones. You'll have to give me a little bit. I did this whole presentation as best I could with like photoshopping and stuff like that to give an idea. But essentially, the skylights are going to be very narrow. These are only about, we have the same ones in our house. They're just a little bit under 4 feet long, and they're well under 2 feet wide. So they're very thin, and they're designed to fit within the actual bays, so you don't have to do any sort of cuts. They're not like the large kind that would be in a modern house. It looks somewhat period specific. So that's that part. And then the second part, and again, 5 seems somewhat symmetrical with the 3 windows. You could do 3. I just want some skylights up there, so we're looking at 5. And then on the second part is the windows, which is the big part. And it's a funky structure. If anyone goes up really close to it, it's sort of like an elongated pyramid. So the windows have to be built out on each one of these structures. Well, yeah, on these windows right here, you'll see that they're actually built outwards from the structure. They're not laid flat, so they have to shed water, or the water will run over the windows. So they're going to have to be built out. Those windows that are there right now, I had measured, because we're looking to have a tenant downstairs that's doing a whole big plan and a renovation down there. And those particular windows are just legal for egress. So that's why I put essentially just a duplicate. I don't want it to be bigger. I don't want it to look weird. It has to look symmetrical. I'm very OCD. Certain people like Drew will tell you that. So it's going to have to look identical. So that's why I really just essentially extrapolated the same exact window. That was just my attempt at a Photoshop. And that would be if there was one here, and one on the other side. And again, with design review, I'm willing to work with everybody. If you don't think that looks right, I'll go with 2, I'll go with 1. But again, this was all caused because I have to have at least 1. So 1 is going to have to be up on that second floor for code. And that is about kind of it. Not a really terribly huge project. Just trying to think of anything else. We may, but I don't want to really make any changes now, but I may want to put, eventually redo the windows to have grids. I didn't know if I should talk about that. We didn't talk about that yet, Kyle, but do you really have to talk about like the old grids, the kind of colonial grids? Is that something you guys would like to know about if we did decide to replace windows? I really don't want to muddy the waters then. Maybe we'll come back and talk about that another time. But that's about the extent of the project. I'm open to any questions.
So I'd say typically and the board can weigh in, but because your existing windows aren't
Right.
grids,
Right.
correct? I mean, I called out in the memo, and you had here in the slides the potential for grid, but it wouldn't be a situation where replacing windows would be going from a grid pattern to no grid.
Right.
The existing ones are double hung, and then there's the potential for the new windows to utilize a grid, so.
Well, if I did do the new windows, I'd probably do the whole building
Yep.
as grids. But most of the windows are still functional, and that's also down the road. And I can come back again. It's going to be a project, for sure.
Any questions for the applicant?
I just wanted to clarify the question about the quantity of windows. There's one there currently, correct?
Not on that second floor.
So there's.
One
so if
on
we're-
the depot
So there's one.
facing side, right?
There's
right
this one.
here.
Yeah, okay.
That's
then-
actually not even, that is actually a small window that just has a wall air conditioner in it.
Okay.
So we would change that one to match the one in the front. So then there's a whole nother level above it.
Yep.
And that's where I have to put one in. So then the question is, do you put 1, do you put 3? I have to have 1 for code.
So
It has to be an egress window.
I'm just going to go back to the first slide because it shows the existing condition. So existing, there's the
That is there,
one
yeah.
on the front, and then the small one you
And that's just.
just
the
mentioned
small
on the
version.
side. And then the proposed has an additional one on the front, an additional one on the side, replacing that small one on the side, and then an additional one out back. So right now, it's 1 on the front, 1 on the side, 0 on the back. It would be 2 on the front, 2 on the side, 1 on the back, the way it's shown here.
Any other questions? I'll jump in. I love this building, and I took a personal interest in this building a few years ago. And I think you're doing just the right thing with it.
Awesome.
You did make the mistake of bringing up windows. We can't, I don't think that we are in a, because you're not changing out all the windows, I don't think that what we have to say can be any more than guidance, and I'll just share. If you put in windows with mullions, we like to see them have some relief on the outside, not just flat lines, because they look so fake.
Oh, no, I would actually, they make grid over glass.
Yeah,
on
I
the
know.
Outside.
That would, in my opinion, not part of this approval, would be a game changer for that building.
Yep. And that's, yeah, we did that. I don't know if you know where my house is, but we we're 2 blocks away, and we renovated an old 1800, and we did that architectural grid over glass, so when it snows, the snow collects in it. So that would be what it would be, but I'm more than glad to work with everybody, and just, because I really want what's been sort of too bad, especially after Petrillo's had the fire, that whole corner is kind of dead. And I'm really wanting to be nice, because when the train gets in there, people come in right now, there's no train station. I can't, I think, and well, with the prospective tenant, I probably can't really say who's possibly going in there, but it's possibly a really nice addition. So it can really be something again. I would also love, not to keep going here, but lighting is not good, because I always thought putting like just lights up on the tower would be really cool. But I think you said that if anything, we're trying to discourage lighting. Is that sort of the thing? Like, they don't like lighting? You know how like something would shine a light up on a tower, just to kind of make it a piece of.
Yeah, so I think
That's not in this application. We're talking
upward
freely
facing
right
lighting
now.
is generally discouraged by the ordinance.
Gotcha.
I'm just looking at lighthouses, and historically, do lighthouses have grids? Or is it just,
Well, this is
we see a
this-
small black hole?
Yeah, the lighthouse, well, ask for it. But, yeah, lighthouses, what are they usually, sometimes they would have like just a very basic grid,
A
sometimes. it would just be
metal,
a whole-
yeah, I've just,
Yeah. But this was actually the old, I'm sure you know, it was the old hose tower. So this was actually, so this part, just give you a quick history. So this is actually not old. That was actually built in the 80s. It was actually the public restrooms at one time. And then LL Bean converted this over with the train station, and this was just office space that was Freeport. It wasn't FEDC, it was, I think Freeport Merchants or something. So that was just office space. It was very 80s, kind of low suspended ceilings, not really terribly impressive. And then essentially, this part is the old part, and that has a storied history. That was actually moved from uptown up here, and then somebody wanted to save it. So Ed Bonney, did you ever know Ed Bonney? A lot of people knew Ed Bonney. He was kind of a character, and he was all about this train station. He told me stories about, he's passed, but his mom had, at one time, there actually used to be access on the outside. His mom went up to see, spot airplanes up there. So, but it was originally designed just to hang hoses, the fire hoses. So that would allow you to get the water out of the hose. So they would strap it up, put it down. And matter of fact, the new public safety has a very similar structure now. They actually have that small tower on the brick building. It's the same exact thing, just smaller. So that is the old part, but Ed was always like, it's not historical. And I'm like, well, it was historical enough that the town felt they needed to save it, so it's down here. But there's even pictures at one time where this had a big window up here. So, and it's in the hose tower, which is really cool. So it's taken so many different, I've climbed up as far as here. And then there's a big wall off, I guess, where they had pigeon problems or something back in the day. So you really, unfortunately, I can't go all the way up top. I've tried. But,
So you've seen the photo that has the window up high.
Exactly.
Those were true divided light windows back then.
Yep.
And the building at the base, which really is the one that's, I think, would benefit most from them. But again, this is not part of your approval.
Right.
That had true divided
Yeah.
light windows. 607.
Well, you're making me feel better about this because right
Good.
now,
Usually people feel worse when we start asking about it.
I've had this poor building that's like literally starting to rot before my eyes. So, but it was already well on its way out. I have not had this that long. So,
Scott, I just want to
building was
compliment
hurting.
you on doing this. I took a look the other day and realized, the facade, the whole building needs some attention, and it's going to
There's a
look
lot.
beautiful. What you
I
proposed.
think it
Thank
will
you.
be,
Yeah,
and
it's
the
great.
colors we're trying to be. We were thinking electric pink for the.
Same here. We're all with you on that.
Yeah.
No, I think we're going to go with.
Can we make that a condition of the approval?
We're going to probably go with like a gray or, there's a lot of really neat colors, but I'm really partial. I live up in Port Clyde a lot over the summer, and really almost the traditional is the traditional weathered shingles and just getting a clear stain and then letting it just weather over time, but it has a little bit better lifespan if you actually get the pre-dip paint. So We may end up just having to go with like a grayish beige or a gray, but it's probably going to be a very similar color, but probably just a little bit different. And we're also painting the whole building as well, and that'll match the tower.
Nice.
So, yeah, wish us luck.
Yeah. Any other questions for the applicant?
No, I just want to say, I concur. I think it's great to see people put some resources into buildings in town, particularly ones that are noteworthy in some way, shape, or form. And you're clearly doing that, so thank you.
Appreciate it, Drew.
Just like back to the windows for a second.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any right or wrong about the quantity of windows. So I think what you've shown makes sense, especially from like imagining the spatial experience from the interior and having on the third floor piece windows on more than one side, which would really like light up the space better. So that would be good for the occupants. But I was just like poking around at precedents when it comes to the grid configuration. And initially I was like trying to think of this as like a cottage style, but it's stylistically like indeterminate, I think. So I ended up landing on the South Freeport Church, and there it's a 9/9 configuration. Might be a little too much for the size of these windows, but I think the more gridded approach probably makes sense here, like just like in that sort of vein of sort of
Right.
classical looking Freeport architecture.
So just to be clear, if we did, because right now the big thing is getting the openings cut, getting, the framing done, and then, of course, the window insert. So if I did want to pursue a grid, and 9/9 is great, whatever, would that be another real quick meeting? Are we good to try that, or, okay?
I'm just saying this, he doesn't have to come back. We don't, in my opinion, that's only my opinion, but the photos that you referred to that I just had up on my screen was 6/6 on the,
Right, yeah. 6/6, either way, but yeah, they would be the nice windows. It would not be the bad windows. Yeah, we wanted to look, well, I know what he's talking about. Sometimes if you do the grid over glass, you can do them in between, which is kind of the normal, but then it doesn't really have the same effect. Because sometimes when you have the grids on the outside, they really pop. And it actually kind of draws to the building.
anyone have a proposed motion?
Sure. You
I'm con-
want to do it?
No, go ahead.
Have fun.
Okay. Be it ordered that the Freeport Project Review Board approve the printed findings of fact and design review certificate for 23 Depot Street, or Depot LLC, D. Scott Gleason, for the installation of 3 new windows and 5 skylights at the Hose Tower building located at 23 Depot Street, Tax Assessor Map 11, Lot 134, application dated 5/27/2025, finding that it meets the standard of the Freeport Design Review Ordinance with the following conditions. The approval incorporates by reference all supporting plans that amend the previously approved plans submitted by the applicant and their representatives at Project Review Board meetings and hearings on the subject application to the extent that they are not in conflict with other stated conditions. And 2, prior to construction, the applicant obtain any applicable permits from the Freeport Codes Enforcement Department.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of the motion as presented? Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, everybody. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Good luck with that. It's great. Is there anything else you have for us?
Could I ask when our next meeting, is it the 16th
Next, well,
or the 20th?
so the next meeting would normally be July 16th. As of now, we don't have any applications for July. So the submission deadline would be next Wednesday. So if something comes in, then July 16th. But if not, I'll let you know like sometime the end of next week if that meeting just needs to be canceled. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Kyle, I was going to ask you to do something, but at this meeting, but maybe just in future meetings. When we have, tonight, one technical thing that came up was site runoff, and we have a code requirement that the post-development runoff equal the pre-development, but there are nuances to that. When you see a chance to give us a 3-minute tutorial on something like that, or your photometric plan, just because particularly we have a couple new board members, if you can throw in a 3-minute tutorial on a couple, when you see those chances, I think it would be, it's information we should know, and it's more than we have in the ordinance.
Yeah, I could bring up on screen, like, the parts of the application that specifically speak to that and just talk about them.
Yeah, that, and also just what the applicants go through in meeting requirements.
Yep.
Great. Anything else, Drew?
Yeah, a quick one. I know we had talked at a previous meeting about the possibility of trying to schedule a briefing, in essence, on ordinances that apply to this group, so that we can discuss them and ask questions about them, et cetera. I would still like to see that done if at all possible. One quick thought might be, if July 16th.
We could do it in July.
Has
yeah.
no projects, that might be a good opportunity. But if not, I would still like to request it. I think it would be very helpful.
Yeah. It'd be good to do, as long as it's a foggy night in July.
Yeah, I'll give it some thought. Let me see what the scope of what I would want to kind of put together for the board. If it's something I can do in a week or two, then maybe it's something we can do at the July time slot. If not, save it for, an upcoming meeting, but yeah.
And I would probably suggest that be something you can consider offering. I don't know if annually is too often or not, but there are changes on the board, and there are also changes in the ordinances. So it may be a helpful thing to just do a quick briefing.
Yeah, I think with the comp plan being adopted soon, we're going to have a lot of zoning updates and changes within the next year or two, probably. So I would say at least for the next several years, an annual update on things that have changed is probably not the worst idea. Yep.
To that effect, could I ask maybe, I don't know how hard this would be, but to take some of the proposed changes that are with the comp plan and with the design review that we know about and that are about to come up for approvals, maybe there's just like a quickie ABCD for each of those, and you could attach that to whatever we're going to talk about, so we have some idea, because sometimes it's hard to get to all the other meetings and even listen to them, and if they're coming up and we have an idea of what it is, and we may have questions that we could all discuss and then get sent over to the appropriate groups.
Great. Does the town manager have anything for us? Good news.
Well, I'm going to just let you know now, because we may be next in August. I'm not going to be here in August, just to let you know.
Okay.
I know that for sure.
Yeah, and actually, that makes two. I mentioned that to you for it as well.
Okay. Okay.
Be on the side of a mountain in Peru.
Oh, good. Cool. Peru, Maine?
It's exciting.
Sorry? The Peru in Oxford County? Great. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Good job tonight, Dan.
Excellent.
Thank you, everybody.